Thanks so much. It's great to be here. So we've talked quite a bit about the links between climate and people and how it fits into the planetary health that we're all striving towards. But what's the impact of nature, and how can we dig a bit deeper into this? I'd like to start by going back to 1968. And this is the first time a human took a picture of our own planet in the universe. And at the same time as we were starting to explore the outer universe, we're also drawing our attention to our own little planet. And this is probably the most important environmental photograph ever taken. It's called Earthrise. And of course, what does the planet have in special? What makes this place unique? And it is life on Earth. And when we talk about biodiversity, I hope that everyone here can relate to that, and everyone here perhaps has some image that comes to your mind when I say that word, biological diversity or biodiversity. And we often think about those animals that you just mentioned, rhinos, elephants, but actually this is biodiversity. The small guys that run the world. Basically, it's an image that shows the number of species in different groups in proportion to how many species we believe there are on this planet. And you'll see here that the elephants we just saw are actually quite tiny because of the number of mammal species on Earth, compared to, for instance, fungi or, even worse, insects, of course, which really dominate when it comes to numbers, and also the functioning ecosystems that also relate to us. So if you just think about the amazing job that Carl von Linné started here in Sweden more than 250 years ago up to now, we've done an incredible job of documenting life on this planet. Or have we? Because now we know just a fraction, perhaps less than 10 or 15% of all species on this planet. And if we focus on things like fungi, and we just talked about fungi here, we have an understanding of about 7% of all species. And of course, no one bothered about that green mold that grows on bread that everyone just threw away until Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, which then saved hundreds of millions of lives. And of course, all those species could have untold properties that benefit us as humans, but also do great things in nature. And for fungi, for instance, as an example, we know just a fraction of them, and it may take between 750 years to 1,000 years to describe all fungal species on the planet at the current pace, which we may not have if things continue as they are now. And it's not only about fungi, it's about plants as well. We have beautiful plants all around us, and the number of species we're discovering each year, about 2,000, doesn't seem to stop. So we are on this steady trajectory that every year we're adding new plant species, many of them with incredible properties in terms of food supply, in terms of fiber contents, many different uses for us, but again, also for the ecosystems themselves. And that's all across the world. We have a huge dependency on plants, and recently we compiled data from across the world showing that we have about 50,000 different plant species which we use for many different things. Again, in terms of what we eat, but also our medicine, in terms of all the different use that you can see here on the right-hand side. And this is something that has not only characterized current times, but also the history of humankind itself. So basically, for the 100,000 years that we've lived on this planet, we've always used plants for our well-being, our survival, and our health. So we see this image here from the Amazon, which many people think is this pristine area, but it's not. It's an ecosystem which has been shaped by local communities for millennia, and where people have interacted with plants for all kinds of uses for a very long time. And we see that across the world, where people and plants and the rest of biodiversity have this very interlinked connection, which makes us healthy, which makes us happy. So, what is different today? I think so far I've just painted this beautiful history and this amazing interconnection that exists between us and biodiversity. Well, despite the fact that there are more than 7,000 plants that we consider as edible, about 40% or more of all the calories come from just 3 plants, which are wheat, rice, and maize. So 3 grasses, which means that we eat just like cows, right? Cows just eat grass and we just eat grass. So there is a huge shift between us in the more than 100 years ago and millennia before that, from eating and exploring different nutrients, different plants from around us, from a very wide diversity of plants, into those monocultures that now dominate landscapes and constitute the biggest driver to biodiversity loss on land. So basically that conversion of natural ecosystems to monocultures, which also makes us extremely vulnerable, because when the war in Ukraine started and the wheat production, of course, fell off the cliff, and then countries in Africa which were dependent on wheat from Ukraine, which doesn't make any sense, but of course that really shows how susceptible we are to change in geopolitics, but also if something bad happens to those plants, such as new diseases. We also have the consequence of agriculture today, and the fact that pollution and water treatment from sewage, but also from agriculture, is a huge problem globally. This map shows the countries which have less than 50% of all the water treated, and that's the brown color here, which of course also affects our oceans. And this is well known in terms of the impact on wildlife, so different animals in ecosystem, and of course also to our own human health. So the direct and indirect effects where pollution really poses a tremendous threat to life and to normal ecosystem functions. And on top of that, the effects of climate change and the combination of landscape changes, both on land and then also in the oceans, of course, which means that those threats are just accelerating. And I'm pleased to be part of one of the world's largest environmental organizations, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, as a trustee for WWF International. And every year we've been giving away those summary reports showing that, for instance, since only 1970, many of you were probably born by then, we've had a decline of about 73% of all the populations across many different vertebrate groups. So basically all mammals, birds, lizards, amphibians. The populations in those thousands of species that have been monitored have declined by 73%. And in some places like Latin America, where I come from, this number is about 94%. So it's a huge decline in the number of individuals in those species. From the plant side of things, which is my main job at Key as Director of Science there, we've compiled information about the threat to plants and the fact that about 45%, just think about that number, almost half of all plant species on this planet are likely to go extinct by the end of the century if things continue as they are. And the situation is even worse for all that diversity which we haven't discovered yet. So basically, it's about 7 to 8, so 3 in 4 plant species that we haven't found which are likely to go extinct. So from the first day we put a new name on a species, it is already threatened, which is of course a huge opportunity loss if they are to disappear. So a dire picture, but there are solutions, and we know that there is still a narrow window opportunity of turning things around and bending that curve. I could mention many, but I'd like to start with our diversification of the food systems and the fact that we need to go from that monoculture way of thinking to diversifying the diversity of species that gives us all the nutrients we need and the health and well-being benefits that we should have. And in places like Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of the worst affected areas in the world, we also have one of the largest concentrations of edible plants. So you see here on the right-hand side, it's very red, and that's because there are hundreds, if not more than 1,000 different edible plant species in those countries, which can provide sustainable food for millions and millions of people in those countries. But we need to go again from those small monocultures to a much more diverse food system. And that's of course not only something that affects sub-Saharan Africa, but if you just think about health benefits of a more diverse diet, B vitamins, there are 6 different kinds, and many parts of the world, both in developed and non-developed or less developed economically countries, are suffering from deficits in B vitamins. For instance, folate, which affects about 40% of the population in South and Southeast Asia. And we now know the distribution of the concentration of those 6 bivitamins in 280 plants, which are shown on the left. And we can now use phylogenetic information, so how species are related, and artificial intelligence to predict the content of species which have not yet been explored in the lab. And that's what you see here on the right-hand side. So we can now use new tools to predict where the next source of very important micronutrients can come from. And again, a more diverse diet is an answer to many of those issues that we're facing today. Another example is the imperative to protect, restore, and sustainably use nature. I'm Brazilian. I'm proud of coming from the country with the highest biodiversity on this planet, but it's also one of the most affected in terms of the destruction of the environment, which has taken place over hundreds of years. And what you can see on the left-hand side is the distribution of the Atlantic rainforest, which used to cover the entire eastern part of Brazil, but now only about 8% remains. So that's all the red you can see here, it's gone. It's rainforest, which is very diverse, but no longer there. But there are some tiny fragments, the dark green that you can see over there. So a few years ago, I just read reports we had Bolsonaro in power and just saying, go ahead and burn down and do whatever you want. You're not going to be prosecuted. I started crying. I said, enough is enough. So with my kids and my wife, we just decided to put almost everything we owned, all the money we had, to buy rainforest. And we created a non-profit on the ground to go from science to practice on the ground. So we purchased 120 hectares of forest. We started a foundation and we created a field station, which you can see here, which we're going to open in a few months, as a way of catalyzing research, conservation, and the restoration in this part of the world. I don't know whether that was very stupid or very wise, but you know, we just had to do it. And the big dream here is to see how we can really make it financially profitable for the NGO to restore huge tracts of land. So we want to connect now a huge area that creates a corridor between two protected areas in the Atlantic forest. So with funds from the Swedish Research Council, we're now using remote technologies, artificial intelligence, to understand how much benefits we can get, both in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity uplifts, and not least the benefits to people. Because people without forests, they are affected by not having access to clean water. There's a lot of unemployment, landslides, all kinds of problems. So we really see that nature, climate, and people's benefits are coming together in what we're calling planetary health at a regional and local scale. So I do believe, and that's why I continue and like to be a scientist, that science can help us get us out of this mess. And I think that with science, we can really make contributions, as we just heard from Kim and many others here, which are about bending those curves. So going again from a bad state for biodiversity to a much better one, tackling pollution and dealing with climate change towards a living, healthy planet. So just in conclusion, I think that now it's really important to acknowledge how biodiversity is absolutely critical to human and planetary health. There's no point in really talking across and not one with each other. I think that we have to think globally. We have to understand what are the big challenges, but also act locally. And I think that those tensions that exist between me and between what the politicians and industry have to do, they are not useful anymore. We have really to work together. And that's why we need to understand how we can join forces, because the task ahead is huge, which is why I'm so pleased to be here today to learn from you and to interact with you in the rest of this conference. So thank you.